Go.
Good day, everyone. Mr. Edward Pamis. Good day, everyone. Mr. Edward Pamis. I'm Samantha Carolino with Group 4 members, Mr. Marcos Ceylan, Christine Diagdal, Mr. Jeremy Lizardo, and Mr. Ralph Magno. From this, we will discuss the contract from the Articles 1305 to 1369. Let us call on now Mr. Ceylan to discuss Chapter 1, the general provisions starting from Article 1305.
Next slide, please. So, Chapter 1 of General Provision. Article 1305, a contract is a meeting of minds between two persons whereby one binds himself with respect to the other to give something or to render some service. So, this article gives the definition of a contract. It lay emphasis on the meeting of the minds between two contracting parties, which takes place when an offer by one party is accepted by the other. So this contract is deemed perfected or given force by the law when the components of consent, object, and consideration are present. So the stages of making a contract. First is conception, is the first stage where the parties begin their initials. Negotiations for the formation of the contract. Second is the perfection of birth. It is the second stage of making a contract. Here, the parties had a meeting of minds or mutually agreed as to the object and consideration. So the third is consummation, is the last stage which consists in the performance of the obligation. So the parties cease to be contractually related to one another. So next is the Article 1306. Article 1306, the contracting parties may establish such stipulation, clauses, terms, and conditions as they may deem convenient, provided they are not contrarily to law, morals, good customs, public order, or public policy. The freedom to contract is both a constitutional and statutory right. The right to enter into contracts is one of the liberties guaranteed to the individual by the Constitution. It, it is also signifies or implies the right to choose with whom one desires to contract. In other words, an individual does not have an absolute right to enter to any kind of contract. However, because the autonomy or freedom of contract is both a constitutional and statute, statutory right to uphold the right, courts are enjoined to move with the necessary cautions and prudence in holding contracts void. So according to the contractual stipulation, there are limitations to the freedom to contract. It is fundamental requirement that the contract entered into must be in accordance with and not repugnant to an, an applicable statute. Its terms are embodied in every contract without need for the parties expressly making reference to it. So a contract must not be contrary to law. A contract intended to circumvent and violate the law is void. So next is the a contract must not be contrarily to morals. Morals deal with norms of good and right conduct evolved in a certain community. So these norms may differ or can be different at times and places and with each group of people. So an example of this is a contract to live together without the benefit of marriage in consideration for a sum of money is immoral. A contract must not be contrary to good customs. So customs consist of habits and practices which through long usage have been followed and could be enforced by society or of some part of it may considered as binding rules of conduct. It has the force of law when recognized and enforced by the law. Example of this is a notarized legal separation agreement between husband and wife is contrary to good customs. So this is a good example of to contrary to good customs. A contract must not be contrary to public order. Public order refers principally to public safety, although it has been considered to mean also also to the public. Example of this is a contract legalizing adultery or concubinage. A contract must not be a contrary to public policy. Public policy is a broader than public order, as the former may refer not only to public safety but also to consideration which are moved by the common good. So example of this is one example of this is a contract entered into by a prosecutor not to prosecute a carnapper in consideration for let's say 5,000 pesos to against the public policy to punish crimes. Next is we have the Article 1307. This article innominate contracts shall be regulated by the stipulation of the parties, by the provision of Titles 1 and 2 of this book, by the rule governing the most analogous nominate contracts, and by the custom of the palace. If the first obligation is the subject to a suspensive or resolutory condition, the second obligation is deemed subject to the same condition unless the contrary is stipulated by the parties in their contract. So, given this, the reason for the rule contained in Article 1299, it is that the efficacy of the new obligation depends upon whether the condition which affects the old obligation is complied with or not. If the condition is suspensive and it is not complied with or no obligation arises, and if it is um, resolutory and it is complied with, the old obligation is extinguished. Next article is we have 1308. This article contract must bind both contracting parties. Its validity or compliance cannot be left to the will of one of them. So this article stresses the mutuality of contracts that is both parties are bound. The principle is based on the essential equality of the parties. So one fact is two-person entered into a contract of lease of land. It was stipulated that at any time before the tenant constructed any building thereon, he would cancel the lease. So the issue is what is the stipulation valid, or it is the stipulation valid in this scenario. So it is a yes. When cancellation is made, this by itself is a fulfillment. So given this situation, the provisions of a contract must agree or can be canceled at some point. Next is Article 1309. Article 1309, the determination of the performance may be left to a third person, whose decision shall not be binding until it has been made known to both contracting parties. So one example of this is in a contract of sale, the fixing of the price and the delivery date can be left to a third person. So this company could be a big or even a small company can be given in this scenario. So the decision binds the party only after if it is made known to both. So the effect where the determination is inequitable is the contracting party is not bound by the determination if it is evidently unjust as when the third person acted in by mistake. So in this particular example, so if a in this contract is been held by a mistake, it is not been given to the third person. The liable for that is the manager or to be uh, the head person of the company. Next is Article 1310. Article 1310, the determination shall not be obligatory if it is evidently inequitable. In such case, the courts shall decide what is equitable under the circumstances. So whatever be the determination made by the third person shall be both parties, except when it is evidently uh, iniquitous, in which case the court shall decide whatever is fair. So this is an example of in this given law. So, a tenant of a rice field of Miss De La Cruz was not able to give the lease due to Miss De La Cruz for 2 consecutive rice seasons. Who will decide on the case? How do you think it will be decided? Justice or equity? So, based on Article 1310, the court will only be the one to decide on the base on justice and equity. Justice means giving each what is due, but equity is a process by which court relax the sanctions of the law for humanitarian consideration. Next is Article 1311. Excuse me. Article 1311, contracts take effect only between the parties, their assigns and heirs, except in case where the rights and obligation arising from the contract are not transmissible by their nature, or by stipulation or by provision of law. The heir is not liable beyond the value of the property he received from the decedent. So in this contract should contain some stipulation in favor of a third person. He may be demand its fulfillment provided he communicated his acceptance to the obligor before its revocation. So a mere incidental benefit or interest of a person is not sufficient. The contracting parties must have clear and deliberately conferred a favor upon a third person. So heirs and assigns are liable for a contract entered into by the decedent, because generally when we are speaking of the rights and obligation, they are transmissible to the heirs and assigns. So what a person can receive by way of inheritance and therefore as an heir cannot be less than his legitimate time, neither can be what do you call this obliged to pay more on an inherited obligation than the estate or to the inherited. So the general rule for the uh, Article 1311 is the third person has no rights and obligation under a contract to which he is a stranger. So there could be instances where a third person may be affected by the contract. So in contracts containing a stipulation in favor of a third person. In contracts creating real rights. Contracts entered into to defraud creditors or the contracts which have been violated at the inducement of third person. So another general rule is the creditors are not affected by the contracts of their debtors. So the contracts made in fraud or creditors may be rescinded. Contracts by which this contract by which is a debtor uh, gratu- uh, gratitude disposes of his properties or allegations made even for a valuable consideration when a judgment has been rendered to an attachment has been could be finished or done immediately are considered fraudulent or a fraud uh, committing. So transfers or assignments made by an insolvent are deemed fraudulent or fraud and should be set aside for a time being. I think in this slide we have an example uh, there. So one example is that Don Camelio owes 50,000 pesos to Don Facundo. If Don Camelio dies, his daughter Carmenchu has done obligation to pay Don Facundo, but not beyond the value of the property that she inherited from Don Camelio, which is 50,000 uh, 50,000 in price. So Papito ordered a cake for his daughter Papita from Miss Baker. Papita, as the daughter of Papito, may demand uh, the cake from Miss Baker. So in this given situation, the third person has no value or the third person is not deemed to pay uh, or they are not deemed to pay the liable or the cost of the congruent. So Article 1312. Article 1312. In contracts of creating real rights, third person who come into possession of the object of the contract are bound thereby subject to the provisions of the mortgage law and the land registration law. So Article 1312 speaks of the third person bound by contracts creating the real rights. So previously we talked about Article 1311 that the third person is not liable for the cause or the mistakes of the inheritance or the heir. So in this, third persons have nothing to do with contracts entered into by other persons. So however, third persons are bound even in the contract creating real rights when the third person comes into possession or comes into contract or um, comes into possession of the object of the certain contract. So a real right is binding against the whole world and attaches to the property over which it is exercised wherever it go. So these are the examples of Article 1312. So Arturo leases his property to Ben. So Ben registers such lease. Later, with the consent of Ben, Arturo sells the same property to Charlie. So Charlie, who was an outsider to the lease contract bet, Arturo and Ben has been become the buyer of the object of the contract of lease. He must honor the lease contract between Arturo and Ben. So the given example in this is that Charlie is involved in the such situation they are in with Arturo and Ben. Next is Article 1313. So here, creditors are protected in cases of contracts intended to defraud them. So the rights of defrauded creditors in this article represents another instance when an outsider can, in a sense, interfere with another's contract. So example is if Leia gratuitously gives Piolo a parcel of land, said creditors may ask for the rescission of the contract to the extent that they have been prejudiced. So the liability of the third person responsible for the breach of contract, that it recognizes as an instant when a stranger to a contract can be sued for damages for his unwarranted interference with the contract. So given this type of situation, that even if a third person is involved in a certain damages, they will also be issued to pay for the damages they have caused to that certain thing. So the tort or wrongfully conduct is known as interference with contractual relations. So as I've said, that even a stranger to a contract can be sued for the damages for his unwarranted interference to the contract. So it it pre it presupposes that the contract interfered with the valid and the third person has knowledge of the existence of the contract or must have known of it after a reasonable inquiry. So the word induces in the provision refers to situation where a person causes another to choose one course of conduct by persuasion or intimidation. The interference or inducement gives rise to liabilities for damages because it violates the property rights of a party in a contract to, in other words, to reap. The reap is REAP, the benefits that should result therefrom. So the injunction is that the appropriate remedy to prevent a wrongfully interference with contracts by strangers to such contracts where the legal remedy is insufficient and the resulting injury is irreplaceable or irreparable. So last is the Article 1315. Sorry. Wait. Sorry, Article 1314. So Article 1314 recognizes as an instant or when a stranger to a contract can be sued for the damages. Sorry, in my notes, it has not been. Oh, here we go. So 1314, Article 1314 and Article 1313 is actually have the same scenario. So I apologize for that. So what I've discussed recently is 1314 article. So let's move on to Article 1315, please. Thank you. Article 1315. Um, Actually, I'm just gonna read Article 1314 because we skipped the slide. So let me just read the Article 1314 again. So Article 1314 recognizes as instant when a stranger to a contract can be sued for damages for his unwarranted interference with the contract. So the tort or wrongfully conduct is known as interference with contractual relations. It presupposes that the contracted interfered with is valid and the third person has knowledge of the existence of the contract or must have known of it as a reasonable inquiry. So let's proceed to Article 1315. Article 1315. These contracts are perfected by mere consent. And from that moment, the parties are bound not only to the fulfillment of what have been or has been expressly stipulated, but also to all consequences which, according to their nature, may be in keeping with good faith, usage, and law. So the classification of contract according to perfection. So the consensual contract, or that which is perfected by mere consent of the parties. So a consensual contract is a contract that is founded on the mere unanimous agreement of interested parties and doesn't need to be implemented through an official procedure. It is based on purely unanimous consent of the interested parties and does not have been implemented by formal procedure. So example of this is when Anne, as an employer, hires Brian as an employee. As soon as both have agreed on the terms of the employment or the contract, so the real contract or that which is perfected in addition to above by the delivery of the thing subject matter of the contract. So in this case, the real contract is also an addition to the above by the delivery the thing subject in the matter of the contract. I think we have another example. Next, yes, we have another example. So, wait, yeah, yeah. Example, Cian borrowed from Yani a 5,000 pesos as Cian security for the debt. Cian promised to pledge his diamond ring to Yani. So before the delivery or upon arrival of the delivery of the ring to Yani, the contract of pledge is not yet perfected. So Cian later on refuses to pledge the ring so that Yani can demand the payment of the obligation, although it is with a period, but Yani cannot require Cian to deliver the ring as a security because there is no real contract of pledge yet. So in addition to this, there is no a given um, opinion or a given what do you call this? What do you call this? There is no agreement on the delivery or the packaging. So there is merely a consensual contract. So to constitute a pledge. So it exists is a personal right, the right of action to the part of Yani to demand the constitution of the pledge. So there is no contract held in the delivery or upon arrival of the packaging of the ring or the pledge of the ring. So the effect of perfection of the contract is from the moment the parties come to an agreement uh, on a defined subject matter and valid consideration, they are bound not only. So next we have Article 1316. Article 1316. Real contracts such as deposit, pledge, and commoditum are not perfected until the delivery of the object of the obligation. This article makes a distinction between a contract that is perfected by consent or consensual or ordinary contract. A real contract is those contracts that cannot be perfected without the delivery such as commoditatum, pledge, and loan. So commoditatum refers to a gratuitous loan of a movable property which is to be returned undamaged to the lender so it could return the payment of uh, the ordered of the people. So pledge is a bailment that conveys possessory title to property owned by the debtor to a creditor to secure repayment of some debts. So one illustration is that when one enters into a contract of pledge, the contract is not perfected until the object pledge to the creditor. Suppose Mr. Lulier wants to convert his 24-carat ring to money because he is in dire financial constraints and he needs cash. Thereafter, he approached Miss Chambunting, the cashier of ZYZ Pawn Shop. In order to constitute a contract of pledge, the ring must be placed in a possession of Mr. Bunting. In real contracts, delivery of the object is necessary because without the object or the contract, the other the other party cannot exercise his duties under the contract. Excuse me. Next is we have Article 1317. Article 1317. No one may contact in the name of another without being authorized by the latter or unless he has by law a right to represent him. A contract entered in the name of another by one who has no authority or legal representation or who has acted beyond his powers shall be unenforceably uh, unless it is ratified expressly or impliedly by the person on whose behalf it has been executed before it is revoked by the other contracting party. So the requisite for a person to contract in the name of another, he must be duly authorized or he must be above the law or by the law a right to represent him or the contract must be subsequently ratified. The example of an unauthorized a form of unenforceable contract in this scenario. In Marga's name, but without her authorization, Cassie sold Marga's car to the Hector. The sale of the car is unauthorized. Note that in the in this example given, mere lapse of time cannot cure the defect. So this is not a ratification required by the law. So the contract is unenforceably when it is represented by a person who is not authorized or has none legal representation. So the effect or the remedy, the ratification either expressed or implied by the person on whose behalf it has it has been executed. So the effect or the ratification cleanses the contract from all its defects from the moment the contract was entered into. So there can be no more ratification if the contract has been previously been revoked by the other contracting party. Thank you. That's all for me, sir. Next reporter, please, for chapter 2, essential requisites of contracts.
Essential requisite of contract general provision. Article 1318. There's no contract unless the following requisite concur. First, consent of the contract parties. Second, object certain which is the subject matter of the contract. Third, cause of the obligation which is established. According to side of defense secretary Fidel Ramos and the UP President Jose Cuerva of June 30, 1989 mandates prior notification before policies and militaries official can access and conduct operation on UP ground. On other hand, we cannot conduct an operation without any consent of both parties. Kumbaga, hindi tayo pwede magkaroon ng ano, ng kumbaga hindi tayo pwede magkaroon ng operation nang hindi natin nagkakaroon ng consent sa both parties. Siyempre magkakaroon tayo ng problema pagdating sa authority. Kumbaga hindi natin pwedeng i-push through yung bawat kumbaga yung mag-a-arrest tayo ng tao, hindi tayo pwede agad-agad na pumasok kung wala tayong warrant of arrest. Ganun po. Then sa section 1, consent, Article 1319, consent is manifest by the meeting of the offer and accept upon the thing and the cost which are to constitute the contract. The offer must be certain and the acceptable absolute. A qualified acceptance constitute a counteroffer. According to the law, the offer must be certain in order for the contracting parties' obligation to be established, and the acceptance must be similar to the offer. Otherwise, there would be no meeting of minds, thus no contract. It also features a set of terms and conditions. It can be seen in the article how the contract should be passed appropriately because it depends on the meeting to fulfill agreement and a document to confirm it by the company or agent to control it. And otherwise, acceptance may be letter or telegram does not be bind bind the offerer except from the time it can be is acknowledged. The contract in such a case is presumed to have entered into the place where the offer was made. For Article 1320, acceptance may be expressed or implied. Let's go over it by explicitly and what implicitly. In the When the statement is made in written or verbally, it is said to be expressed. Implied when it can be interfered from the party action. For example, Ina agrees with writing with Tini that he will make a delivery himself. In implied, Ina and Tini has agreed to supply the item due to Ina, but in change, the agreement to delivery the thing due to Angie and Tini delivery the thing to Angie without acceptance. Next, for Article 1321, the person making the offer by fix the time, place, and manner of acceptance, all of which must be complied with. For example, the individual make the offer by specific the time, location, and mode of acceptance, all which by must be followed, or the offer will be cancelled. An offer is terminated when the offeree reject it. It may be construct as a counter offer, and it could be result in the offer with withdrawal. If the offerer does not specific in time limit for the offeree acceptance and the offer is made a person, the acceptance must be made right away. As the result, the offerer cannot complain about not given a time pair to accept or reject the offer. Article 1322, an offer made through an agent is accept from the time accepted in communicating to him. When the offerer hires a third party to act as his agent, the offer must be by the agent is deemed accepted by offeree, not from the offerer knowledge or as known as principal, but from the moment the agent received the communication of acceptance. And an attorney, in fact, who was authorized by a power of attorney is an example of an agent. Okay, next. Article 1323, an offer becomes ineffective upon the death, civil interdiction, insanity, or insolvency of either party before acceptance is conveyed. Insanity, insolvency, and civil interdiction are all indefined. Civil interdiction is mandatory ancillary penalty that judge implicated anything that stands out between the conclusion and that if the former is not carried out due to the communication or pardon. Anticity is legal word for mental condition or brain disease or defect. Insolvency is defined as inactive or lack of sources to pay one's debt. Dito makikita naman natin yung pagkakaroon ng mga penalty depends on the situation kung paano ito mapupunta. Paano po ito mapa-flow sa mga taong nagkakaroon ng ganitong situation. Like sa insanity, like sa mental condition naman, hindi natin kasi may iwasan yung magkakaroon tayo ng na makakatalo na meron palang problema sa pag-iisip or in what way is may mental disability na hindi natin alam. Kumbaga, may mga tao kasing nagkakaroon ng ganong sitwasyon pagdating sa court. Kumbaga, yung kalaban hindi nila nalalaman na ganito pala yung ability ng tao kaya napunta sa ganitong sitwasyon. Ayun po. Then, for example is Mercedes offered to sell the beach resort to Luis San Cuevas for amount 1.8 million pesos. But before the day they going to meeting to payment and their contract will be made. Maria Mercedes died before. Therefore, the meeting of the mind of two parties become ineffective because of the death of Maria Mercedes. Dito na papasok yung civil interdiction. In the preceding illustration, supposedly the Maria Mercedes was sentenced for the life imprisonment because she was found guilty in murder case that there's no acceptance and being conveyed by Luis to Maria before the sale. Therefore, the offer was by Maria can effectively because the sentence carried by civil interdiction. For insanity, same as the above illustration, if Maria Mercedes became innocent before Luis San Cuevas accept her offer, the contract became effectively because an innocent person cannot be consent to a contract. Ayun na nga. Bali, hindi tayo pwede magbigay ng kontrata sa taong merong disability sa utak. So, the insolvency also, if Maria Mercedes was declared by the court as the insolvent person due to her inability or lack of means to pay one debts before Luis and Cuevas accepted the offer. Therefore, the meeting of the minds of the parties is not valid because of insolvency of the offerer. So next, after Article 1324, when the offerer has allowed the offeree a certain period to accept, the offer was may be withdrawn to any time before acceptance by communicating such withdrawal except when the option is found up, upon consideration as something paid or compromised. For example, the option contract is distinguished from the main contract, which the parties may join into later if their main agreement is complete. If it is contract between the offer and offeree, in which the former offer that latter the right to buy or not to buy specific goods in exchange a valuable price. So, dito makikita magkakaroon tayo ng option contract. Kumbaga lalabas dito yung salitang ano marunong tumupad sa usapan. Ayun. Pero minsan kasi nagkakaroon din ng bearing pagdating sa offer and offeree because of the situational. For example na lang is nagkaroon ng problema si offeree because kailangan niya ng pera. Then si offerer is nagkaroon ng misunderstanding of the between dun sa pag-uusapan nila dahil hindi na-explain ni offeree yung nangyari sa kanya. Then, next, then magkakaroon tayo ng buy and sell kumbaga ang mangyayari. Ganun po. Then for Article 1325, unless it appear otherwise, business advertisement of things for sale are not indefinite offer by mere invitation to make an offer. For example, is advertisement for items for sale at businesses may or may not constitute a firm offer. They are essential invites or proposition to the reader to make an offer. However, if the advertisement has all the details required in the contract, it may consider a firm offer, or it is an firm offer when the object is fixed. If an advertisement has all of the information required in the contract, it is firm offer by it is firm offer to buy an advertisement item. So next, 1326 advertisement for vendors are simply invitation to make a proposal and advertiser is not bound to accept the highest or lowest binder unless the contract appear. So the best binder or highest or lowest in advertisement result in a legal enforceable contract. Each bind implies contract perfection as long as superior bind is submitted. If in this condition is not explicitly stated, each bind is essentially an offer, which the advertiser may refuse. All parties participate in the auction must agree to the auction rules and it an offer it is rejected, the person that asked to bind is not obligated to accept the bind or execute a deed of sale in the bidder favors. Next, the Article 1327, the follow cannot be give consent to contract. An elimis an elements pass unemancipated minors. Second is instant or delinquent person or deaf mutes who, who do not know how to write. Since the legal age was dropped by 21 to 18 years old, there's no one emancipated minors over the age of 18. When someone is innocent or delinquent, they will disconnect from from reality and no idea what's they going on. They must enter into valid contracts during lucid times, which may occur in the race situation because they are insane or capable of understanding what they are doing. Therefore, the contract entered into the incapacitated person enumerated in the law are not void. They are only void if only one party cannot give his consent. But if both parties are incapacitated to give consent, the result contract is unenforceable due to Article 1407, except when the minors are liable under their contract despite their minority. Lastly is Article 1328. Contract entered into during the lucid interval are valid. Contract agreed to the state of drunkenness or during the hyponic spell are voidable. Contract they are voidable due to incapacity. Incapacity. Contract entered into by mad or re- regained people unless they are behave during election time or while inebriated are avoidable, which temporary result a loss, complete loss of understanding and may be equivalent of temporary insanity. Con- Construction may be during the hyponic spell caused by medicine or by liberated of unintentional hy- hypnosis, hypnotism, or as a person walks while sleeping because there are person of incapable of cognitive agreement in
I'm Samantha Carolino. I'm discussing the Chapter 2 from Article 1329 to 1339. For the Article 1329, the person enumerated under this article are incapacitated or walang kakayahan to give consent to contract due to their lack of mental capacity to do so. They are, they are incapable, either deaf, mute, insane, or demented. The contract is valid if incompetent who may be placed under judicial guardianship or legal representative. There are still other disqualifications provided by law that will incapacitate a person to give consent. Persons who are suffering the penalty of severe interdiction, Hospitalized lepers, prodigals, deaf and dumb were unable to read and write, those of unsound mind even though they have lucid intervals, and those persons by any reasons that cannot take care of themselves and are easy to be taken advantage of body. On Article 1330, a contract where consent is given through mistake, violence, intimidation, undue influence, or fraud is voidable. If the contract is given through violence or force, intimidation or threat, and undue influence, which is power, then the contract is voidable. A characteristic of consent must be intelligent, free, and spontaneous. So it must be intelligent. You have the capacity to act on it. It must be free. You have freedom or voluntarily. Uh, and it must be conscious at no vitiation at all. So magiging voidable yung contract is binding and valid unless annulled. So proofs to needed to sustain annulment to annul the contract on the ground of vitiated consent. So it must be full, clear, and convincing. Next slide po. Article 1331. So it answers the question, when does an error or mistake vitiate a consent? So kailan ba natin masasabi na sufficient yung mistake or error to vitiate a consent? So ang meaning ng mistake or error is the false notion of a thing or a fact material to the contract. So here are the nature of mistake. It may be a fact or a flaw. So it arises from ignorance and lack of knowledge. It is contemplated by law, a substantial mistake of fact. So the other party won't give consent if he know the mistake. It may be unilateral or bilateral. So these are the examples of Article 1331. Number one example is the substance of the thing or the object of the contract. So example, Bal is buying from Paul an earpad, but Paul is selling earpad cases. Knowing na hindi magagamit ni Bal yung earpad cases kasi wala naman siyang earpad is not substantial error. Ang substantial error is kung alam niya yung mistake or error, hindi siya magbibigay ng consent. Number two, example, is those conditions which have principally moved one or both parties to enter into the contract. Ito naman yung example is Leslie is selling his townhouse for 2 million cash, but Bretman is buying the townhouse, thinking that the price is payable in installments. So, dun pa lang, hindi sila nagkasundo sa mode of payment. Si Leslie, binibenta niya ng 2 million in cash, pero si Bretman, ang pagkakaintindi niya is installment. So, dun pa lang, yung both parties ay hindi nagkasundo sa condition. Number three is the identity or qualifications of one of the parties. So, Jeremy donated his car to Toast. Jeremy thought that Toast was his half-brother. But it turned out na si Toast ay hindi nga kamag-anak. So, yun yung dito naman yung contract na nagkakaroon ng qualification sa identity. So, ito naman yung mga epekto or effect of mistake of account. Number one, where mistake is simple. So, hindi po na-include dito example, pero yung number one na example dito is when they sold to Hafu a parcel of land with an area of 567 square meters at 415 pesos per square meter. The document of sale, the purchase price is 285,000 when it should be 235,305 pesos. So, dito pa lang yung contract is simple at pwede pang baguhin. Kasi sa 567 square meters, ang naka-include sa contract is mas mataas na price. Pero ang price talaga nito is 235 lang. Yung pagkakamali na yun is simple and pwede pang palitan. Dito naman sa number 2 is where mistake grows. So, when they sold to Hafu a parcel of land for 235,305 pesos, stated as having an area of 567 square meters but with an actual only of 467 square meters. Dito naman, sa second example, malaki na yung pagkakamali at mapapansin na dahil yung square meters yung pinaglalabanan. Ang nakastate is mas malaki, pero ang actual niya is maliit na square meter lang. Next is Article 1332. The assumption of both of the parties involved in a contract are well-oriented and aware of all stipulations included in the contract is overruled by this article. This article gives the burden of proof to the other party with respect to one party, claiming that during the time he signed the contract, he is unaware, insane, and has no capacity to sign the contract. Dito papasok yung presumption na one always act with due care and sign with full knowledge of the content of the document. So the following does not apply in the cases when one of the contracting parties is unable to read. Number two, if contracting party is an illiterate or literate, but he could not understand the language, which is signed and later, there is a presumption na created na there was a fraud or mistake when he signed or gave his conformity to the contract, if he could not understand the language used in the contract which he signed. So in order to prove the right consent, the other party must prove that the document was fully explained to the party alleging fraud or mistake. So ang example po sa Article 1332 is a blind man sign a contract with his thumb mark, believing it is a contract of mortgage, but it is really a deed of sale. So, if blind man claims fraud or mistake, other party has the burden of proving compliance. So, yung blind man, yung ginamit niyang pag-sign ng contract is thumb mark kasi nga hindi naman siya nakakita, obviously. Sa pagkakaalam niya, sanla lang yung pinirmahan niya. Pero, it is really a deed of sale. So, magkakaroon ito ng problema dun sa other party. Next is Article 1333. There is no mistake if the party alleging it knew the doubt, contingency of risk affecting the object of the contract. So, if there are knowledge of doubt or risk of other party, then there is no vitiation of consent. So, ang example dito, if Gina acquired a house and lot from Gino Property Holding, historically, it is known to the public that Gino Property is prone to flood during the rainy days. When Jose transferred to the newly purchased, the same house submerged in the flood. Thereafter, Gina demanded to cancel his purchase agreement with Gino Property Holding on the ground that his house was flooded. So, dito naman, yung other party, may karapatan siyang mag-cancel ng purchase or agreement niya, dun nga, sa pagbili ng bahay, knowing na yung bahay na bibili niya ay may history ng pagbaha. Meron pa rin siyang karapatang mag-cancel sa agreement. Next slide is Article 1334. Mutual error as to the legal effect of an agreement when the real purpose of the parties is stated may vitiate a consent. So, dito naman, ini-emphasize yung mutual error. So, parehas na pagkakamali ng both parties. It provides a requisite if kailan ba yung mutual error ay magkaka-vitiate ng consent. So, may another example din sa 1334, Article 1334. So, si Fermin and Nicolas entered into a written contract affecting the land belonging to Fermin for in consideration of 500 pesos. At that time, the contract was entered into. Fermin thought that he was given 500 by Nicolas for the mortgage of his Fermin's land. So, sanla lang yung pagkakaalam niya. But Nicolas, on the other hand, thought that by giving Fermin 500 pesos, he had purchased the land. So, sa pagkakaalam ni Nicolas, pag binigyan niya na si Fermin, sa kanya na yung land. So, the contract is voidable and may annul in court. However, if there has been a meeting of minds of the object of the contract, the proper remedy is termination of the instrument. So, as to the legal effect of an agreement, the real purpose of the parties is suspended. They execute deed of sale and mortgage. So, magkaiba sila ng intention. Isa, mortgage, isa naman bidder. Next is Article 1335. Medyo mahaba siya, pero ang explanation po dito is violation and intimidation. So, sa violation, it is more on physical coercion, more on external. Intimidation is more on moral or mental coercion, which is internal. So, the example of this article is Hakuna Matata signs a document because every time he refuses, he is hit by the butt of the gun, which causes blood to follow from his head. Then the contract is voidable. So, nagamitan ng violence si Hakuna sa pag-sign ng contract. So, here are the requisites for violence to vitiate consent. The employment of serious or irresistible force. Yun nga, ginagamitan siya ng force. And number two, it must have been the reason why the contract was entered into. Kaya siya napunta sa ganong sitwasyon ay dahil sinasaktan nga siya, kaya napapirma niya or nabibigay niya yung consent niya kasi gumagamit na ng force. Next is the requisite for intimidation naman or threat. Pananakot. Number one, must provide a reasonable and well-grounded fear of an evil, considering the age, condition, and sex of person concerned. Evil must be imminent and grave. Evil must be upon his person or property or that he posed the sentence or a sentence. It is the reason why he enters the contract, and the threat must be of unjust act and actionable wrong. So, on article, next po is yung on article 1336. Violence or intimidation shall annul the obligation, although it may have been employed by a third person who did not take part in the contract. So, dito naman, pumapasok na yung third person, involved na siya. So, dito, violence and intimidation executed by a third person who was not in the party entered the contract. The agreement is null and void. Even if nag-exercise or employ ng violence or intimidation was the third person at hindi yung kasama mo sa isang contract. And yet, ito yung reason kung bakit ka nag-enter into that contract. The contract can be annulled, meaning voidable pa din kasi yung consent mo ay vitiated. Provided pa rin yung requisite sa previous article ay present pa din. Yun yung explanation. So, on Article 1337, but improper advantage from undue influence takes place when a person is made to do something that is against his will because of fear, the desire for peace, or other feeling which is unable to resist. However, undue influence is different from the consent given in a contract of adhesion. So when the other person may choose not to adhere to the contract and feel free to accept or not to accept. So yung ine-emphasize naman dito is yung undue influence. So only undue influence vitiate consent. Due influence or reluctant consent and reverential fear do not vitiate consent. So providing circumstances that should be considered in determining yung undue influence is it must be confidential. So relations between the parties yung confidential, and next is mental weakness, ignorance, and financial. Next slide, please. On Article 1338, ni-emphasize naman dito is yung fraud. So the fraud, basahin mo natin. Violence or intimidation shall annul the obligation, although it may have been employed by a third person who did not take part in the contract. So fraud is every kind of deception, whether in the form of insidious words or misrepresentations for the purpose of leading another part into error and thus execute a particular act. So ano ba yung insidious words or machination? It is a deceitful scheme or plot with an evil design or fraudulent purpose. It exists where the party who obtains the consent does so by means of concealing or omitting material facts. So here are the requisites of fraud. It's number one, it must have been employed by a contracting party upon the other contract. So, yung pasok dito yung Article 1342 kanina. Number 2, it must have been included, uh, it must have been induced the party to enter into a contract. Number 3, must have been serious. And number 4, it must have resulted in damage or injury to the party seeking annulment. So on legal aspect naman, there are two kinds of fraud. In the celebration of the contract, ito yung number 1, dolo causante or causal fraud. Vitiated consent. So kung walang fraud, yung other party ay hindi mag-enter into it. Yung number 2 naman is dolo incidente or incidental fraud. Even if meron or walang fraud, the parties would have agreed just the same. So, incidental sa pagbigay ng consent. Most likely, it will not invalidate that contract. So, hindi naman ito magiging or magkakaroon ng vitiated consent, pero it could be the ground or to claim for damages. So, yun yung kinds of fraud during the celebration at the time of the protection of the contract. Number 2 is in the performance of the contract. So, existence of an already perfected contract. Meron na dun sa nag-perform, may pandarayan na nangyari, and this kind of fraud is also not a ground to annul that obligation or contract. But then will claim damages. So, example dito is yung obligation to deliver a specific rice. Ayun din yung dineliver. But may halo na siya na another lower quality ng rice para lang makapandaya. Next is yung requisites ng dolo, requisites for dolo causante. The fraud must be material and serious to induce consent, and the reason why our party entered into that. Number 2, the fraud must be employed by only one, the contracting parties. Pag 2, committed fraud, then the contract will remain valid after all. Parehas silang dalawa. Number 3, deliberate intent to deceive. Only mistake and no intention na mandaya kasi paniniwala mo dun at dun ka naniniwala na kaya ka naniniwala dun, siyempre pinaglalaban mo rin siya. Then, no fraud at all. The other party must have rely on that untrue statement and must not be negligent. Dapat yung one party must rely on the untrue statement, so wala ding negligence. So, kung meron naman, hindi magiging vitiated yung consent. Next is, ito yung balin example niya. Si X is actually guilty of concealment. So, si X, number 1, vertical 1339 pala example. Next slide na po. Sorry. So, on 1339, a neglect of failure to communicate that which a party to contract knows and ought to communicate constitutes concealment. So, in this case, concealment is equivalent to misrepresentation. Silence or concealment by itself does not constitute fraud. The concealment contemplated in Article 1339 presupposes a purpose or design to hide facts which the other party ought to know. So, ito na yung explanation. Failure to disclose facts meaning fraud by concealment, where adhere is a duty to reveal them. As when the parties are bound by confidential relations constitute fraud. So, example nito is yung partnership. Nabanggit ko na the X and Y is partnership property. Involved pa rin dito si third party na tatawagin natin letter C. So, si X ay nalaman niya na si C ay third party at interesado sa pagbili ng land na pag-aari nilang dalawan, Y. Pero si X naman, medyo mautak siya, kinonvince niya si Y na ibenta na lang sa kanyang lupa. Tapos, binenta niya kay C ng mas malaking halaga. So, siya lang yung nag-benefit. So, si X is actually guilty of concealment. Bilang partner niya si Y, may duty siya na mag-disclose ng fact doon sa interest. Next po, Article 1340. On Article 1340, I think si Mr. Marcos Raylan na po. Thank you.
Sorry for the delay. So Article 1340. The article refers to the usual exaggerations in trade, which are not fraudulent by themselves when the party has the opportunity to investigate. Um, Wait, just a second. The exaggerations are also known as dealer stock or trader stock or dolus bonus, which constitute tolerated fraud as long as the other party has the opportunity to check and know the facts. What tolerated fraud covers? Tolerated fraud or dealer stock usually refers to the misinterpretation of traders tending to minimize and perceive defects of the thing or service advertised for sale. Exaggerations or magnifications of its qualities and its establishment with qualities that it does not possess. So what tolerated fraud covers? A tolerated fraud covers the dealer stock do not give or rise to action for that. Um, the stupidity of the victim, which is real cause of his loss. So according to this, the victim is the one who is what do you call this? Is the reason why uh, he has been the one to take action for the damages of the insignificance because he's the one that uh, immediately trusts the dealer stock. So when there is a written contract, what does not appear on the face of the contract should be regarded as the trader's stock. So next is the Article 1341. Article 1341. A mere expression of an opinion does not signify fraud unless made by an expert and the other party has relied on the former's special knowledge. So my opinion for this, one example of this is it is not included in the article. So let me just say it. Romeo, on buying a watch, was assured by the seller that it was a good watch and could not run without rewinding for 1 week. In the opinion of the seller, this is a mere expression of opinion that is not fraudulent. But if the seller was a watch expert, and the only reason why Arlene bought the watch was the opinion of the seller, the contact is voidable on the ground of fraud. So the problem is that uh, Rosa, for desiring to buy a certain property, hired an expert to assure its true value. But the expert's opinion turned out to be wrong, which is Rosa was therefore misled. So may Rosa so the question is, may Rosa ask for the annulment of the contract? So the answer is no for that because his own expert or his own uh what do you call this? Uh his own expert opinion committed an error, not her but the expert. So the reason for the rule on expert's opinion, the opinion of an expert is almost in the same category as a fact, given the fact that they are also an expert um, on categorizing everything. So particularly when this expert's knowledge is relied upon by the other party. So next is we have Article 1342. Article 1342 misrepresentation by a third person does not vitiate consent unless such misinterpretation has created substantial mistake and the same is mutual. So a third person has no connection with the contract. If the misinterpretation has created substantial mistake and the same is mutual, the contract may be annulled, but only on the ground of mistake. So we have another example, an example for this. So let's say that letter B wants to buy a parcel of land on which to build a house. Meanwhile, letter S owns a land on which he wants to construct a commercial building, while C tells B and S that the area where the land is located is residential, which is a residential zone. B and S then enter into a contract sale. It turns out that the area is a commercial zone. Under the facts, the sale may be annulled because of substantial mistake, which is mutual. So, given this type of situation, uh, it can be redeemed again by the by letter B and C, B and S, sorry, for not being updated that the area they have constructed a building has a area of a commercial zone. So under the facts that the sale can be annulled again because of the substantial mistake, which is mutual. So Article 1343. Arti- Article 1343, misrepresentation not intentional but in good faith is considered a mere mistake or error. So the principle remains the same even the durins is employed by a third person who did not take part in the contract making the contract voidable. So example is that letter S sold a ring to letter B. So S honestly believed that what he sold to B was a diamond ring. So in the eyes of a person or a normal buyer, it can be it can be a diamond, a real diamond. So it turned out that it was not a diamond ring. The misinterpretation of B is a mere mistake, and the contract is voidable on the ground and not on the ground of fraud. So honestly speaking, that letter B was misinterpreted. It was not hindi sinadya ni letter B na magbenta ng ganito kay letter S, which is um it's a mere mistake, and it could be a hindi sinasadya ni letter B ito. So uh, the contract can be voidable on the ground but not um hindi sa kasalanan ni letter B. So let us proceed to Article 1344. Article Article 1344, in order that fraud may make a contract voidable, it should be serious and should not have been employed by both contracting parties. So incidental fraud only what do you call this? Oblige the person employing it to pay damages. It is said that fraud uh, may may make a contract voidable. I mean voidable when it is serious. And it should not be done by both contracting parties. So fraud is a serious when an uh, ordinary person leads into an error. So the difference to incident fraud is that incident fraud is committed in the performance of pre-existing obligations, so remedy in damages. So one example of this is that Gono enters into a contract to deliver 500 kabans of rice to Rhea with the price per kaban of 1,300 pesos. Gono delivered 300 kabans but withheld delivery of the remaining stating that the price went up and priced the rice to 1.6 per kaban. So the prod here is dolo incidental because it is committed to the existing contract. So given the price, that per kaban was malinaw na malinaw here na yung pagde-deliver ng 500 kabans of rice to Rhea has a price of 1,300 per kaban uh, of rice. So, but Gono delivered 300 kabans. So, withheld the delivery of the remaining. So, Dolo is the one who uh, make a incidental fraud here that he had 300 300 pesos or 300 price of per kaban. So per kaban um, has the range of 1,600 per kaban. So last article is the Article 1345. Article 1345 states that simulation of a contract may be absolute or relative. The former takes place when the parties do not intend to be bound at all. The latter, when the parties conceal their true agreement. So it is the declaration of the fictitious deliberately made by the agreements of the parties. So we have here that in this article they have already have an agreement or have already committed to pay the exact price in order to produce for the purposes of deception. The appearance of a juridical act um, cannot exist or is different from that which is really executed. So one simulation illustration, the absolute simulation, there is a color of a contract without any substance of uh, the parties not having intention to be bound. So in a sale of a car, it was made to appear that the price was paid when actually it was not. The sale being without any consideration is fictitious. So one example of this is that let's say letter A bought a car, then the seller is letter B. Then when letter A bought the car fully, binayaran ng buo kay B, pero uh, later on B texted or communicated socially to letter A that the price went up on the car that letter A had bought. So that is one absolute simulation that uh, what do you call this? The absolute or the relative that the former takes place when the parties do not intend to be bound at all. So the difference to absolute simulation is that relative simulation in here that parties have an agreement which they conceal under guise of another contract. So they in relative simulation they have a multiple kinds of contract, not only to the, let's say they have a contract to the manager. That is not that is a example of an absolute simulation. But for relative simulation, you will be undergoing to the multiple roles of managers. Like let's say in civil engineering, they have engineer 1, 2, 3, and 4, and hospitality engineering management. So you will be undergoing to engineering 1 first, then to the second one, engineering 2. As time goes by, you will be obtaining a lot of contracts to that particular engineers. So that is that is for Article 1345. Next is Article 1346. Next reporter for Article 1346. Thank you.
So
Mr.
the so that for that Article 1346. So an absolutely stimulated or fictitious contract is void, or relative simulation when it does not prejudice a third person. Is not intended for any purpose contrary to law, morals, good customs, public order, or public policy binds that parties to their real agreement. So basically, yung mga gawa-gawa or katang-isip lamang na mga kontrata, voided yun or walang bisa. For example, si donor nag-donate ng property sa isang donee. So instead of executing a deed of donation, the donor instead executed a deed of sale to conceal the donation intended. Reason for the invalidity of absolutely stimulated contracts, lack of true consent. So it's prejudice to a third person and is generally fraudulent. So for the section 2 object of contracts, article 1347, wait, Article 1347, all things which are not outside the commerce of men, including the future things, may be the object of a contract. All rights which are not intransmissible may also be the object of contracts. No contract may be entered into upon future inheritance except in cases expressly authorized by law. All services which are not contrary to law, morals, good customs, public order, or public policy may likewise be the object of contract. Basically, ayun lang ang parang self-explanatory naman din siya na kung saan lahat ng bagay na wala sa labas ng komersyo ng tao, kasama ang mga bagay na kasama sa mga bagay sa hinaharap o maaring maging bagay na kontrata, lahat ng karapatan na hindi maaring ilipat o maari maging bagay ng kontrata. Walang kontrata na maaaring pasukin sa mga mamanahin pa sa hinaharap maliban sa mga pagkakataon na pinapahintulutan ng batas. So for the Article 1348, impossible things or services cannot be the object of contracts. So yun nga, ang mga imposibleng bagay o mga serbisyo na ay hindi maaaring maging objekto ng kontrata. So parang if the thing of service is partly impossible and partly possible, the effect will be the dependent upon the possibility of the thing of service or service. If it is divisible, the possible part will be valid and the impossible part will be void. And if it is indivisible by reason of law or by agreement of the parties, the contract is entirely voided. Partial performance in indivisible obligation is equivalent to non-performance or non-fulfillment. Next, for the Article 1349, the object of every contract must be determined as to its kind. So the fact that the quantity is not determined shall not be an obstacle to the existence of the contract, provided it is possible to determine the same without the need of a new contract between the parties. So yung mga bagay sa bawat kontrata na dapat tiyak kanilang uri. O ang katotohanan na ang dami o bilang ng hindi tiyak ay hindi maaaring maging hadlang sa pagkakaroon ng kontrata maliban kung ito ay maaaring tiyak na bilang. So, hindi na kinakailangan ng panibagong kontrata sa pagitan ng mga magkabilang partito o both parties. Thank you. Next reporter po.
Hello. Article 1350. In onerous contracts, the cause is understood to be for each contracting party the prestation or promise of a thing or service by the other. In remunerary ones, the service or benefit which is remunerated, and in contracts of pure beneficence, the mere liability of the benefactor. In onerous contracts, something is given or promised as a consideration for the engagement or gift or service or interest or condition is imposed on what is given or promised, although unequal to it in its value. How the cause here is deemed to be both parties in good faith. Remunatory contracts is one where a party gives something to another because of some service or benefit given to or rendered by the latter to the former. Article Article 1351. The particular motives of the parties is entering into contract are different from the cause thereof. The objective and legal reason for the formation of a contract is the cause of the contract, and it is always the same. While the motive refers to a party's physiological or personal motivation for obtaining the goal it varies from person to person. In entering into a contract, each party may have his or her own personal reasons or goals. The validity of the contract is unaffected by the motivation, even criminal motives. But there's one exception. If the motive dictates the contract's objection, motive might be considered as a cause. Article 1352. Contracts without cause or with unlawful cause produce no effects whatever. The cause is unlawful if it is contrary to law, morals, good customs, public order, or public policy. If there is no cause or consideration, a contract of sale is invalid. The contract's purpose is the cause of a contract. It is the prime motive for the parties to enter into a contract. When a cause is illegal, it is against the law, morals, public order, good traditions, or public policy. It is created with the intention of preventing a criminal prosecution. Next slide, please. Article 1353. The statement of a false cause in contract shall render them void. If it's not, if it should not be approved that they were founded upon another cause which is true and unlawful. Contracts that are void cannot be approved under the Article 1353 if another true and lawful cause can be then demonstrated. The contract will still have a valid reason to be upheld. Article 1353 also be used to apply to completely stimulate contracts that are deemed to be invalid. Even though the contract is already void, if it can be proven that there is another valid reason for it, then the contract is valid. Article 1354. Although the cause is not stated in the contract, it is presumed that it exists and is lawful unless the debtor debtor proves the contrary. If the contract does not indicate the reason for the cause, it must be assumed that the cause exists is lawful. However, this assumption may be disapproved. If the debtor can show otherwise, the cause, existence, or legality might be called into question. Article 1355. Except in the except in cases specified by the law, lesion or inadequacy of cause shall not be invalidate a contract unless there has been fraud, mistake, or undue influence. A contract cannot be annulled primarily due to the defect of or deficiency of a cause or consideration. If the lesion or deficiency of a cause is in the consequence of fraud, error, or undue influence, the lesion might be used as a grounds for a contract rescission. Next slide, please. Chapter 3, Form of Contracts. Next slide. Article 1356. Contracts shall be obligatory in whatever form they have been entered into, provided all the essentials requisites of their validity are present. However, when the law requires that a contract can be in some form in order that it may be valid or enforceable, or that a contract can be proved in a certain way, that requirement is absolute and indispensable. In such cases, the right of the parties stated in the following article cannot be exercised. Contract binds the contracting parties in whatever form they have entered into, as long as they meet all the fundamental requirements for their legality. The one way a contract is implemented or expressed is referred to as its form. However, when we consider a form as essential requisite of a contract. So first, when the law demands a form for the contract to be legal. Second, when the law states a particular agreement must be in writing in order to be enforceable, or that the contract must be demonstrated in a specific manner. Third is when a special form is required by the law. Next slide, please. Article 1357. If the law requires a document or other special form, as in the acts and contracts enumerated in the following articles, the contracting party may compel to each other to observe that form. Once the contract has been perfected, this right may be exercised simultaneously with the action upon the contract. This article gives the contractual party the authority to compel to the other perform the legal requirements. It is enforceably may be harmed by irregularities in the formalities. It has been decided that if a document purporting to be a mortgage or a real property mortgage mortgator does not provide a comprehensive explanation of the land's mortgage, it cannot be recorded and thus become effective. Next slide, please. Article 1358. The following must appear in a public document. Acts and contracts which have for their object the creation, transmission, modification, and extinguishment of real rights over immovable property, sales of real property, or an interest therein a governed by Articles 1403, number 2, and 1405. The cession, rep- repudiation, and renunciation of the hereditary rights or those of the conjugal partnership of gains. 3. The partner to administer property, the power to administer property or any other power which has for its object an act of appearing or which should appear in a public document or should prejudice a third person. 4. The cession of actions or rights proceeding from an act appearing in a public document. All other contracts where the amount involved exceeds 500 pesos must appear in writing, even a private one. But sales of good, chattels, or things in action are governed by the Articles 1403, number 2, and 1405. Um, Although not incorporated in a public document or instrument or in writing, the contracts mentioned by the article are valid and enforceable. The public document is only necessary for the parties' convenience and increased protection and registration of the if registration is only required to make the contract valid against third parties. Formal requirements are so for the advantage of the parties and not and are not intended to both inform and to obligate them. Non-compliance has no impact on the contract's legality or the parties' contractual rights and responsibilities. Next reporter, please.
So for the Article 59, so when there having been a meeting of the minds of the parties to a contract, their true intention is not expressed in the instrument purporting to embody the agreement by reason of mistake, fraud, inequitable conduct, or accident. One of the parties may ask for the reformation of the instrument to end that such as true intention may be expressed if mistake, fraud, inequitable conduct, or accident has prevented a meeting of the minds of of the parties. The proper remedy is not reformation of the instrument but annulment of the contract. Kung sa Tagalog, kapag ang magkabilang partido ay namayagan sa kasunduan, ngunit ang kanilang dokumento ay naiiba sa kanilang napagkasunduan, ito ay maaaring ipabago ng kahit sinong partido. Ngunit kapag magkaiba ang iniisip ng napagkasunduan ng magkaibang panig or partido, ang kasunduan ay maaari lamang ipawalang bisa or ma-void. So ano nga ba ang reformation? So reformation is the remedy by means of which a written instrument is amended or corrected to express the real agreement or intention of the parties when by reason of mistake, fraud, inequitable conduct, or accident, the instrument fails to express such as agreement or intention. So, ang halimbawa, si Ali sold his land to Boy. It was agreed that the sale will include all the improvements. Pero the contract as signed by the parties stated that the land is being sold excluding the improvements 3 yon. And in this case, the remedy is reformation because there has been a meeting of the minds. So nagkaiba yung alam ng Bali at saka ni Ali sa pagbenta ng land. So for the Article 1360, the principles of the general law on the reformation of the instruments are hereby adopted insofar as they are not in conflict with the provisions of this code. So, sa ah, meron tatlong bagay na mga kinakailangan sa reformation. Una, there must have been a meeting of minds upon the contract. Pangalawa, instruments or documents evidencing the contract does not express the true agreement between the parties. Panghuli, failure of the instruments to express the agreement must be due to mistake, fraud, inequitable conduct, or accidents. Excuse me. So kapag sa mga tatlo na ito hindi nasunod sa reformation, ang kontrata o ang kasunduan ay ma-void or hindi mapapawalang bisa. So for Article 1361, when a mutual mistake of the parties causes the failure of the instrument to disclose their real agreement, said instrument may be reformed. So kapag ang parehong pagkakamali ng mga partido ay nagdulot ng pagbabago ng instrumento na inihayag sa tunay na kasunduan, ang nasabing instrumento ay maaring ma-reform. Ang magandang halimbawa dito, halimbawa si Tom and Jerry orally entered into a contract of sale of a house and a lot at number 5 Gonzales Street, Barangay Gonzales, Pakil, Laguna. By mistake, the contract as written and signed by the parties states that the house and lot sold is at the number 15, not 5, Gonzales Street, Barangay Gonzales, Pakil, Laguna. The contract of sale may be reformed on the ground of mutual mistake. So for the Article 1362, if one party was mistaken and the other acted fraudulently or inequitably in such a way that the instrument does not show their true intention, the former may ask for the reformation of the instrument. So sinabi doon na that the written instrument may be reformed where the mistake is unilateral and the other acted fraudulently or inequitably. Halimbawa si Astrophy agreed with hypertrophy that the former would loan 500,000 pesos with the latter. In the contract signed by Atrophy and Hypertrophy, it was stated that Atrophy was selling his house to Hypertrophy for the said amount. Atrophy signed the contract in the belief that it was really a contract of loan, not for the house po. So in this case, Atrophy can ask for the reformation of the instrument kasi nga ang akala niya dito loan for 500K hindi dun sa bahay niya. So one has mistaken and the other act fraudulently. Yung isa nagkamali, yung isa nanloloko. Moving on to the Article 1363, when one party was mistaken and the other knew or believed that the instrument did not state their real agreement but concealed that fact from the former, the instrument may be reformed. Ayan. So, kapag ang isa sa mga partido or the other party ay nagkamali at ang kabila naman partido ay nalaman or naniniwalang ginagamit lang nilang kasunduan ay hindi naglalaman ng tunay nilang pagkakasunduan, ito ay tinatago niya sa kabilang partido upang ang kasunduan nila ay maaring mabago o mas lumamang yung isang partido for personal gain. Kadalasan, concealment of mistake by the other party is the remedy of reformation may be availed of the party who acted in good faith. The concealment of mistake by the other party constitutes fraud. So, kung sino yung nag-akto kung sino yung nag-act ng fraudulent ng panloloko, maaring makasuhan ng fraud. So ang tanong, what will be the remedy if one of the contracting party concealed the fact of the agreement from the other? So ang ginagawa dito, yung party who acted in good faith may avail the remedy of reformation. Siya ay makakuha ng remedy of reformation of the agreement since the concealment of mistake constitutes fraud. So mapapabor sa kanya yung kaso. So for the Article 1364, And through the ignorance, lack of skill, negligence, or bad faith on the part of the person drafting the instrument or of the clerk of typist, the instrument does not express the true intention of the parties. The courts may order the instrument be reformed. So nang dahil sa walang kaalaman, walang kasanayan, kapabayaan, may masamang intensyon sa panig ng sa taong nagsusuong ng kapamararaan o tagatala ang kapamamaraan o instrumento na hindi nagpapahayag ng tunay na intensyon ng mga partido, yung hakuman naman ay pwedeng mag-atas ng baguhin ng kapamamaraan o ma-reform yung kontrata o yung pinagkasunduan. Moving on to Article 1365, if two parties agree upon the mortgage or pledge of a real person property, but the instrument states that the property is sold absolutely or with a right of repurchase, reformation of the instrument is proper. So, ang kadalasan ang pinaka-main focus dito is the deed held to be mortgage. The intention of the contracting parties should be prevail, although the deed executed may seem to be one of sale with the right to purchase. So, ang deed held to be mortgaged then is the intention may be inferred from their simultaneous or subsequent acts as well as stipulations themselves in the contract. The act of the owner of the reality transferred having the bounds having bound himself to return the principal and interest securing the obligation by a bound, and the act of the same owner having afterwards assigned the reality to the surety proved that the transaction was not a sale. So hindi na ibenta. Moving on to the Article 1366, there shall be no reformation in the following cases. First is simple donations inter vivos wherein no condition imposed. So ano nga ba ang ibig sabihin ng number one? So simple donations inter vivos where no conditions imposed is a donation is an act of liberality whereby a person disposes gratuitously gratuitously of a thing over or right in favor of another who accepts it. In Article 725, when the donor intends that the donation shall take effect during his lifetime, it is a donation inter vivos. It is distinguished from donation mortis causa in that this kind of donation takes effect after the donor's death. Number two, wills. Wills is an act whereby a person is permitted with the formalities prescribed by law to control a certain degree the disposition of his estate to take effect after his death. Like a donation, the making of a will is strictly personal and a free act which cannot be left to the discretion of a third person. Hence, upon the death of the testator, the right reformation is lost. Furthermore, a will be revoked by the testator anytime before his death, and this right is not subject to a waiver or restriction. For the last one, when the real agreement is void, if the real agreement is void, there is nothing to reform or wala nang mababago. So reformation would be useless because the real agreement is being voided and it is unenforceable. Moving on, for moving on the Article 1367, ayan, when one of the parties has brought an action to enforce the instrument, he cannot be subsequently asked for its reformation. Bakit? Kasi yung cases when reformation is not allowed by katulad sa 13 Article 1366 kapag ito ay under ng simple donation inter vivos wherein condition is imposed, wills, and when the real agreement is void, hindi ito matutupad or hindi siya pwede humingi ng reformation kung under ito ng tatlong part ng Article 1366. Yan, kumbaga, when one party has brought an action to enforce the instrument. Moving on the 1368, Article 1368, reformation may be ordered at the instance of their party or his successor in interest if the mistake was mutual, otherwise upon petition of the injured party or his, hers, and assigns. Bali, sa pagbabago o may maaring ipag-utos ng sino man na partido o tagapagmana kapag ang pagkakamali ay isang parehong partido sa petisyon ng partidong agrabyado o kanyang tagapagmana o tinatalaga. So, their heirs or successors in interest in the lieu of the party entitled as stated in the provision of Article 1368. So for deep meaning or deep statement, the burden of proof is upon the party who insists the contract should be reformed because of its failure to express the true intention of the parties. Kung saan ang presumption is that an instrument sets out the true agreement of the parties. Napapalayo na kung yung real or original agreement ng dalawang partido. So the effect of reformation is retroactive from the time of the execution of the original contract. For the last article, Article 1369, the procedure for the reformation of instrument shall be governed by the rules of court to be promulgated by the Supreme Court. Yeah. However, the Supreme Court has not yet promulgated the procedure for the reformation of instrument. Yan. Under Section 7, Rule 130, Rules of Court provides evidence must admissible when original document is public recorded. When original of a document is in the custody of a public officer or is recorded in a public office, its contents may be proved by a certified copy issued by public officer in custody theoretically or theoretically. So ang proseso sa pagbabago ng instrumento neto kadalasan ay sinasaklawan ng mga alintuntunin ng korte kasi pinapahayag dito ng Korte Suprema na sila yun. Thank you. That's for all. We are Group 4. Marcus Gabriel, the members are Marcus Gabriel Subilan, Jeremy Russell Lizardo, Christine Dayagdal, Samantha Meg Carolino, and I am Ralph Andre Magna. Thank you.